Right now, does it really make sense that the Army, Navy, and Air Force all issue their own service contracts for their base support? You have a common framework of delivery in terms of how you palm it to Congress, but then the contracting is done separately. So all the inefficiencies. One of the ways that the administration seems to be doing is they're letting go all the contracting officers. So they didn't let them rehire. For example, they're about a third down. So they have fewer and fewer people. So they're being forced to come up with better ways to execute contracts.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast that we put together to bring to experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering, and we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jake. Welcome back for another podcast episode of the Future of GovCon. Today's going to be fun because we have with us a very dynamic guest, a guy that I've gotten to know pretty well over the years. And I figured out as I got ready for the podcast that I have a lot in common with this guy, believe it or not. But we're really lucky to have on the podcast today with us Chris Decker. Chris is the CEO and the founder for Planate Management Group, which is a great company that's doing amazing work all over the world. Chris has a tremendous amount of experience, good perspective, also has his own podcast. We'll talk about that a little bit. Chris, welcome to the Future of GovCon.
Jake, thanks for letting me come. Appreciate this.
It's awesome. Yeah, we decided Chris has his podcast. We have this podcast. It'd be good to share the experience together. And we got a lot of ideas, lots of thoughts about the industry. We're always talking about it at different events. And so this makes perfect sense to get together.
I always look forward to your GovCon updates, your newsletters. They're always helpful.
I'm glad you like them. There's a lot of work to put them together, but we think it's important to put a little bit of sweat into trying to make sense of what's going on in this kind of crazy industry.
There's a lot of change today compared to years ago.
It is. It's historic times. I'm not sure everybody actually gets that yet. Like really, the dynamics that are happening now it hasn't been since 9/11 that we've seen this much transformation happening in our industry. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I mean, going all the way back to the 80s when I was doing contracts and compared to today, it's just so fundamentally different,
And what I'm asking CEOs and leaders are, what are you doing differently to get ready for what I think is just going to be a massively transformative time for the government contracting industry?
Well, that's true. Most of your CEOs probably are big firms. We've only been around a little less than 20 years, so we're a large small. I can't imagine what a small would have to do today to comply with all these requirements compared to what we went through maybe 30 years ago.
That's true. Yeah, I think the barriers to entry have gotten higher, and I think the small businesses have been fading off, and entering this market now is tough for sure.
And maybe that portends the future. Maybe that's where this is all going.
That's right. Yeah. Chris, you're always on the road. You travel more than I do, which is a lot. So where are you home today? Are you in a restful spot?
I'm in Annapolis, Maryland today,
Right.
just for a couple more days, and then I'm off to Diego Garcia on Saturday.
Fantastic. Yeah. Chris has offices all over the world, literally. And so every time I'm talking to him, he's either he's in Kenya with the team there, or he's down in the Philippines, or he's off on a customer site. So I'm glad we found you home.
Great. Yeah, well, we appreciate it. This is very nice of you, Jake.
The good news, we can do this anywhere in the world, but I'm glad you're home. So I'm gonna talk a little about Chris's background and the why. Why have Chris on here? Chris is he has a very well-rounded background, and so he's in a unique position, I think, to share perspective with this community. First of all, he has a great military career. where he's a Naval Academy grad, and we can't hold that against him. That's just a decision he made early on in life. We'll find out why he did that, and it's been a great career in the Navy. Not rowing boats, but building stuff. Has a master's degree in engineering as well from University of Florida. Again, we won't hold that against him either. As a Vandy grad, SEC. And he spent a great career in the Navy. Retired from the Navy, worked a few years in government, and now things we have in common. We have a podcast. We both have a podcast. We're both veterans. We're both been very involved in ISOA, which we can talk about a little bit as well. It's a great association where Chris has actually been the chair, which is like in a second job. Both have a soft spot for other GovCon entrepreneurs, men and women who have kind of the stomach to start a company, to start a brand, and build a capability in this industry. So, and Chris really brings a dynamic entrepreneurial view of this industry, which I think is different than a lot of the big company guests that we have on the podcast. So, buckle your seatbelts and get ready for maybe even some edgy conversation here with Chris.
Okay. Well, thanks for the intro.
You bet. How did you? Let's go back. Go back to the beginning. How did you grow up? I know you're a Pennsylvania guy. Were you a Steelers fan or a Phillies or a Eagles fan? How did you grow up?
Yeah, we were Phillies guys. My dad was Navy, my brother was a Marine, so it was kind of obvious that we were going to head towards the Navy. So we just settled in Pennsylvania since that's where most of the Germans settled. My great grandfather came over from the Prussian Army, and he settled in that area, and that's how we just kind of all grew up around there. Spoke German, played soccer, traveled to Germany. That was kind of our upbringing. Everyone's an engineer, lots of manufacturing in Pennsylvania. So you're some sort of engineer or manufacturing, blue collar. And so that was kind of the way we were raised back then. Lots of farms.
Talk about the decision to go to the Naval Academy. Was that preordained, or is that something you came up with?
Well, we really had no choice in my family. We had to apply to the academy. That was our only school choice. So that's what we did. And my brother had gone there. And then my father, as I told you, was Navy. So, it was just a natural fit. My sister married academy guys. And, so it was until I got there when I realized maybe this wasn't the right fit for me as an entrepreneur. But still, I did go there.
That's an interesting point. I want to come back to is I know my profile, and I was in the Army, and when I coach people now, and I look at, if I was coaching myself, I probably wouldn't have said make it a career in the Army as an entrepreneur, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's a different mindset, but
Yeah, you're definitely against the stream.
Yeah.
You either adapt or you're out, one or the other.
That's right. I just have a new idea every 10 minutes, and I don't like being told what to do, so I might as well just work for myself.
Yes. Was that a factor when you were thinking back in your Army days? You wanted to do something on your own?
I think that was always in the back of my mind. I don't think
Yeah.
it was. My father was also a career. My brother was a career officer. My mom was a Dodge school teacher. So like you, I grew up with that, and I spent a lot of time in Germany, played soccer, a lot of things in common. I don't know. I didn't really, I needed a way to pay for school, and wound up doing ROTC, and then wound up in the Army. But I think if I look back on it, I think I had to flex quite a bit against my core personality.
Yeah, me too. And so in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, there's basically 3 tracks. You're either a Seabee, where you're in operational forces. Everybody does that in the beginning, very similar to the Army, mostly. And then the second track is public works, facilities management, all that. We all have to do that. And the track I picked was contracts. And back in the 80s, that was not a career track. If you want to make a career, who cares about contracts?
Exactly.
How can this be important? And in the old days, we self-performed everything. We had large engineering staffs, lots of Seabees. We never envisioned that we'd be contracting out all the things we do today. So, but at that time, if you wanted to promote, you don't go contracts.
Right. But you did spend time as a Seabee, though, right? And a CE.
I did Seabees for about 5 years, and then a little bit of public works, but then pretty much all contracts for the next 15 years.
Was there a defining moment in your military career that helped shaped kind of the executive and the entrepreneur and the business owner that you are today?
So what happens in the civil engineer corps is if you're a lot of contracts and a lot of program management and you go to higher level command, um, then you're generally running large programs. So the fact is we're technical as well as acquisition is level three. So, unlimited warrants, $7 billion program at the Pentagon, 7 years. I was there for 7 years. And so during that time, you start seeing things in a different way. Most of the guys that are operational, they'll get their Pentagon tour, but they look at it as like, oh, it's just a painful event. I just want to put 2 years in and get out. But in our community, it is part of our development because we're defense acquisition types.
When did you have a thought in your mind that you might have your own company and be on the other side of the table?
It's so funny. I knew I wasn't a great fit in the Corps because I always had a lot of good ideas that people didn't appreciate at times. But then when I was getting to the end, I was a civilian GS-15 for a few years, and I'm running this program in the Pentagon 7 years. And literally, sometimes you have to stay there overnight. I mean, you got a lot of going on. And so, I'm a bachelor. My brother's a bachelor. He's working SES, working in the government, and both of us came to the conclusion, like, what are we doing? I mean, at 7 years there, you're just running a program. You get a new 3-star every 2 years who has great ideas, and you're like, well, where do you need to go? So that's when I just said, well, I'll resign and do something. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I was getting consulting gigs in the I didn't think I would start my own business, but I didn't know what I would do. And then I got consulting gigs in the Beltway, and they just weren't really. Why did I leave the government? It'd be the same sort of things. I worked at Army headquarters in the emergency management program, and of course, I led the Navy's emergency management program. So, so then I was thinking, well, if I'm going to make this happen, I just need to start, make a go of it. So I just took a one-way ticket to Afghanistan and stayed there until I could get a business going. And it took me some time. I was going back and forth because I had a son, but generally spending like 6 weeks over there, 2 weeks back, 6 weeks.
Is
And
Joe,
that's how I started the firm.
is Joe in the business now, your son?
So he was, but he was just activated. His Seabee unit's been activated. He's
Uh-huh.
the OIC. He's down in Mississippi. Those guys are heading the CENTCOM. There's 130 Seabees,
Oh my
and
gosh.
you can imagine what they're doing over there, probably assessing facilities and those types of things. So
Good luck.
he'll be assigned to Fifth Fleet.
Good luck to Joe. I mean, I know you're a proud dad to have a son kind of carrying on the legacy, right?
Yeah. Well, I was surprised he won it because he went to the Merchant Marine Academy. So I thought he'd be doing Merchant Marine type stuff because it pays a lot better. But for some reason, he wanted to go in the Navy side. So he's a fire protection engineer by trade.
Oh
So he
wow.
worked for us for a couple of years before he went back in. He worked for NAVFAC too, and did his thing.
Great. Well, good. Good luck, Joe, if you're watching this. Be safe out there. Give your
I'm sure he
dad
will.
give your dad one last thing to worry about. But talk a little bit about so I didn't know you. So you went to Afghanistan to kind of get your to get the start. Talk about that experience and like at what point did you say, okay, I'm doing this. I'm setting up Plan 8. I'm going to have my own business.
Well, what happened is, so I was on Bagram, and trying to get work, and of course, all the large businesses said, "Man, we would hire you in a heartbeat." But you're an engineer in acquisition, but we're not going to give you subcontract, and there's no goals over here. And I kept on saying, well, what's your problem? And they basically said their biggest problem was the subcontracts with the Afghan community outside the wire, and they weren't going out there. They had no. The large firms have risk management; they don't go. So I told them, look, if I embed myself in these Afghan firms, then you'll have someone to call, and I'm sure the Afghan firms would value me, and I'll worry about who I'm working for once I'm there. And they said, okay, it's your life if you want to do that. And they handed me off at the gate at Bagram, and I was picked up by several of the leading Afghan families, traded off in a couple of weeks. I was in 3 families, and then I was integrated initially in their construction companies. but then they did engineering. I was involved in logistics. We had security companies. We had shooters, and we were involved in everything from Uzbekistan all the way down to Kandahar. And of course, being outside the wire opened up other doors through the government in terms of there's really an engineer out there, and he's really doing stuff and building stuff, and he's going to the field. And so, and I dressed like an Afghan and lived like an Afghan. So by the time we were done, I had equity stakes in lots of little companies, and we were starting to hire Americans to put them in the key positions in these companies. And that was the beginning of Planate. Not really planned to do that, but we were trying to make a difference, and the U.S. was trying to execute their programs, but no one's leaving the base. How are you ever going to build anything, or how do you know they're not stealing from you, and all the problems you could have? So of course, and I think Jake, that's probably when I met you when you were running your last company, right? Weren't
Yep.
we up in Uzbekistan maybe,
Yep.
or
We were in Uzbekistan, all over the stands. Yeah.
Tajikistan
Yep.
maybe?
Yep.
Because
Harry
we were picking
Eustace up
stuff up
there.
there. Yeah,
Those
Harry.
guys. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy
Yeah.
times. Crazy
Yes, they
times.
were. They were.
And you look back on it now versus where you are, where you are today versus then. And that was that's some important work, and it took courage and entrepreneurial spirit to go do that kind of work and be willing to take the risk, right?
It was definitely a need, and what a great time to start a company, right? Because you have work. It's easy to get work if you want it. Many folks didn't want that work, but boy, there was a lot of opportunity for us.
What was kind of the craziest situation you found yourself in?
Gosh, I got stuck in a safe house right across the street when they hit the UN headquarters. It was a 6-hour gun battle, and we thought, oh, we're going to go down. We all had our stations, but they were being repulsed, and we thought, oh my God, they're going to come through our door. But when if you recall in Kabul, when you're outside, they would have death squads coming in every night, knocking people off, and that was before the UN decided to start consolidating. At that point, they were still disassociated in their little enclaves, and so we were just trying to blend in, but it was all around us. So we were always
Sure.
thinking sooner or later. And I'm sure you had instances of that. There was some gun, checkpoints going up north and south that maybe not our checkpoints passing through, things like that.
Yeah. So how long till you left that theater, and I'm not going to say set up a real business, but you kind of got to the work of building what's obviously become a very sustainable, even a scalable business now.
Yeah. Well, interesting enough, because we were outside the wire, and then there was this discussion like, well, at some point we got to turn these things over to the Afghans because Americans are going to leave. We started getting U.S. direct contracts at that point because we had Afghan speakers, we were integrated in. So all the transition of all the MILCON that, the Army Corps was building fantastic facilities that the Afghans will never be able to operate. The criteria for giant voice and big doors and halon deployment systems. Meanwhile, we're transferring it to a battalion of Afghans that the highest education is a bachelor's degree for the commander. The average education is 10th grade. We're trying to transfer these ridiculous systems that the U.S. was building for them. So there was a total mismatch. So we were quite busy trying to do that. And then when we started getting those contracts, then it took me to Djibouti and then Mindanao. And we basically were just starting to go doing engineering solutions in all the high risk locations around the globe. That's how we started.
So obviously, Planate Management Group is a veteran-owned small business, and maybe tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. Give us kind of the high-level overview of Planate.
Well, interesting enough, we do planning, design, engineering services, and then sometimes construction. And we try to provide technology solutions in deployment areas. But because of these areas, they have these 1-year assignment contracting officers. A lot of them go back to the VA. So we got VA work because of that, because they were back and they would say, well, we work with you guys. Why don't you bid on some of our work up here in the Pacific Northwest or Alaska? These are deployment sites too. These are remote areas. So we started just doing like really odd locations where they didn't have much veteran activity. And then that led into some VA work. So I tend to not try to do too much VA work because we don't want to we could easily be sucked in and be a VA vendor, but we probably do about 35% of our healthcare work is through the VA now. And it's typically design work, or perhaps they have problems in studies and things like that we'll do for them. But our other work is basically to support all the big contracts that you talk about routinely in your newsletter. Every contract that the US government issues that's over 100 million has technical aspects. And typically the large firms try to self-perform that, and they can if it's a steady state cash flow. But every now and then there's an oddball structural engineering problem, or perhaps they have fire protection concerns, a fire. Sometimes they need third-party evaluation because they have a contract claim or a dispute that's occurring, and there was some damage to government property. We do everything from critical energy upgrades and stuff. These are not common things you find within the BOSS contract framework. So we tend to get calls all the time doing all sorts of things around the globe. So that represents our other 2/3 of our work. And on that work, basically, half of its prime contracts with the US government, we're providing oversight to the big firms. And then another third is basically helping the big firms perform under the contracts. And then the last third is VA work. So that kind of represents our portfolio.
Interesting. I didn't know about the VA part. That's fascinating. How'd you come up with the name Planate?
Well, interesting enough, I was in the Pentagon. I think I was on my fourth 3-star. They just announced him coming in. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to retire. And so, so I went back to my office. I brought all the youngest people in. I told them, look, I don't want to let you down, but I'm going to leave in about 30 days. But I got to start my own consulting firm, and what should we base it on? And they said, and I had a lot of smart kids, by the way. I always would recruit my own kids, and they were coming out mostly Ivy League guys, and a lot of girls. I had a lot of women, young women that I sent in the Pentagon. So these gals helped me describe the firm, but we based it on 3 books, which was The 4-Hour Work Week, The World is Flat, and Revolutionary Wealth. And those 3, if you distill them down, talk about organizations of the future that global source, have foreign workforces, but they have very little overhead. They're using the web to operate in a cloud-based solution. We hadn't even done that in the early 2000s. And then also, how would you be able to surge for technical problems and bringing experts in? And so then we said, well, what would that describe before AI? AI probably would tell you, but we came up with, that's a mathematical planate surface, a 2-dimensional surface without height, because you don't want depth, you want worldwide. And so we went online, and my God, Planate was still available, and that was it. That's how we started.
That's awesome. Wow, I didn't. That's a great story. That's a great story. See, you have a great footprint. I mean, I was kind of joking about you traveling all the time, but you've been really smart on building
Lucky.
some great talent. I met a lot of your team around the world. Talk about your footprint a little bit.
So we operate out of 3 support centers. We're in Subic Bay, Philippines, Orlando, Florida, Nairobi, Kenya. They represent our focus in terms of technical excellence. And then we deploy people from there in the 8 time zones they each control. And obviously there's some projects US only, so we have to deploy Americans cleared. Sometimes it's, gosh, we wouldn't want to put an American, say, in Congo right now, or Chad. So we'll send guys from the Kenyan office that, just blend in down there, no problem. And so what we'll do, we're in 26 countries this week, and we do technical support. Some are permanent contracts, some are part-time. And wherever anybody has an issue around the globe, we're always trying to help out in those areas. Clearly, if it's a common engineering solution, you can use a local engineering provider. But if you're trying to store weapons or ammunition, or you're trying to harden facilities, perhaps you have a critical powers requirement that has to meet a US standard, or maybe you have a dry dock in the Philippines that needs to be recertified by NAVSEA, you can't find those technologies locally, those people. So we usually get those calls for those types of jobs.
So lining up on those 3 kind of centers of excellence in the time zones, Talk a little bit about, you definitely have, boots on the ground. This is not theoretical what you're doing, it's real. And you got your finger on the pulse. Kind of let's go through those time zones. Talk about what do you see happening right now in Indo-Pacom, kind of tapping into that Subic footprint you have. But I know you're doing. I mean, you're going to Diego tomorrow. I mean, lots of high level talk, but what's actually happening on the ground out there in Indo-Pacom right now, Chris?
Yeah, so we started out there about 15 years ago, right before the whole Indo-Pacom concept and the whole concern about China, because we looked at it as a market that was underserved. There was no one really operating out there in a big way. And typically the contracts like in Thailand or at that time some Cambodia stuff and things on Kwaj were very tiny. There were boss contracts on Kwaj, but every now and then they would need a design on a community center. So we started a very small footprint. And we brought back all the Filipinos that used to work with me from the old days when I was on active duty. So if you recall, the Seabees travel all over the world deploying, and a lot of times they have civilian support or contract support. Sometimes they have Filipino Americans that are in the military. So those guys reformed out there in the Subic Bay area at the time. Many of those guys passed, unfortunately. But their kids, some of the kids now work for me. So at first we were just out there trying to do our thing. But then as more and more focus got on there, this idea that the U.S. would award contracts, say in Hawaii, and they would fly Americans from Texas, so that they can have a vacation in Papua New Guinea or Subic Bay or Clark. At first that was happening, and we were like, why is the government paying for travel for these big firms? And over time, they're getting smarter, still doing a lot, but they need local presence. They need someone that has local licenses. They can buy things. They can stamp drawings. It's one thing that America is an expert in fire protection, but if you can't apply it in the facility that's local because you don't know the local construction standards. So there was a lot of hiccups that were occurring. Then eventually we got very similar to Afghanistan. We were in the field, and then we started getting more consulting work, and then we got direct contracts from the U.S. government. So now what's happening in Indo-Pacom is you see we're going back to the Vietnam area where the large acquisition sponsors are putting these very large vehicles together, and they're putting them in place for wartime. And so you'll have like the PDI MAC at $15 billion, the Indo-Pacom MAC, which is $10 billion. These are massive vehicles, but they're fishing licenses for the biggest firms in America, but the task orders are 500 million, 700 million, and they're complex. You're talking about construction in a third country with other foreign nationals, trying to technology to deliver it on a timeline. So quite challenging for the three principal acquisition sponsors in the Pacific. But we think, we're pretty busy. We have well over 100 folks out there, and we get requests for all sorts of things. Now, lots of firms are showing up, but the problem that I see is they usually don't have long-standing presence, and they're worried about their P&Ls all the time because they got to carry these costs. So, are they in? Are they not? Will they change on the next administration that changes in the Philippines if they tilt towards pro-China? Will they stay? We will, but with these, so I think those are the types of things that people are thinking about.
So it's not surface what we're hearing Indo-Pacom. I mean, it's gone down because there's so much focus on the Middle East again, right? There's so much focus on even Eastern Europe, but you're still seeing a pretty heavy pace of activity out there from a contracting perspective.
So, so from a construction, if you look at the construction, they're about 2 years behind. So they have these operational plans they got to meet, and the construction activities are mostly delayed because of permitting and acquisition delay. They didn't have the vehicles in place. They do now. And they do have the funds now. So the issue is you have to build these facilities first before you can have the boss services or other government entities involved in it. So there's this pent up demand for the big firms. Most of the large service providers don't want to do at risk construction. So those are unique firms that do that. And once we're done with those facilities, then there'll be a handoff with the local nationals as well as the US. So you see all this kind of delayed is what I'm observing.
So pin up demand and probably now that the contract's awarded, we could expect to see more activity out in
Yeah.
Indo-Pacom? Okay.
Well, if you look at the POM for Indo-Pacom for construction, it's I think 4 billion this year, 6 billion. So you can see it really ramping up, and these tasks are massive tasks, and it involves lots of firms. There's plenty of work if you're technically proficient in this space, and then everyone's waiting to catch it. Like for example, they just solicited the Palau task, which is a whole new marine center where all the ships can, it'll be a dual use facility, obviously. So they're expanding it by a factor of three. They'll have now more tourism and all. So it's beneficial to Palau, but it involves dredging and a lot of marine aids and more robust facilities. That won't be in place probably for a year and a half, 2 years. But at that point, I'm sure there'll be logistics contracts that'll follow, that people will be managing that. There'll probably be a US office there in some way. So all these things are happening in airfields, and they're principally five types of facilities that are being adapted, right? Airfields, ports, power, transportation hubs. If it's not just logistics, could be roads, and then usually it's warehousing or storage of weapons or something else that's going on. Where you're building facilities to store stuff. So those are the five principal adaptions. And then, of course, NAVFAC and the Air Force guys, they're trying to adapt these general things to these locations to meet operational requirements. All behind schedule.
Yeah.
All behind schedule.
Yeah. And that the pace could pick up any day. I mean, if it does seem the administration is slowing down the drumbeat a little bit on the rhetoric, at least out in Indo-Pacom, probably because we got to give some of this time to catch up, right? Some of this capacity.
Could be. I mean, we're missing timelines. Obviously, for us, we have to comply with environmental permitting, local acceptance. We have host station agreements. Typically, when the Chinese are investing in their facilities, they don't have to worry about any of that. There's a lot of corruption, and usually the host nations, for whatever reason, agree to whatever the terms and conditions are, even at the expense of their people. So they're turning dirt, a year earlier on any project than we can. And so they're moving out with their investments, right? They have the inner ring that they've been working on. You have some of the largest dredge operations going on in the world now in the inner ring. And now they're investing in the outer ring, which puts us in reach of Hawaii and California with airfields and things like that.
It sounds like Planate's in a good position and thinking strategically and long term in Indo-Pacom. Let's shift to Africa because I know you have a great team there.
Yeah.
But that market's changed a lot, obviously, here over the last
Yes.
18 months. What do you see happening now in Africa in terms of U.S. government interest in contracting and investment?
Okay, yeah, that's a great change. If you looked at Africa, say 5 years ago, it was a total USAID addiction, right? You had so many USAID type contractors, and they're not typical service providers. They're delivering on metrics, women's health, outcome-based metrics. And I think that was one of the reasons the administration was taking, because they were talking about solving world hunger, but it never got solved. But the metrics were getting better every year, and the contracts were continuing. So you had large armies of them. We were doing infrastructure and engineering, and every now and then we would get work with them. But typically, those contracts were more about taking care of people and populations than it was building facilities. And so when that dried up, lots of unemployment in Kenya and other areas, lots of small firms going under, all the supports. But we were untouched because we were still doing infrastructure and our presence was smaller. But what we see now is we have little missions like in Sudan, or we're going up to Djibouti or maybe up to Somalia, sometimes down in South Africa. But these were only technical engagements. What we're seeing now is this whole DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, they're moving it from a U.S., we give you money for whatever you do, to more of an investment strategy, very similar to the way the Chinese are doing it. The difference between our strategy, and I'm sure the administration's thinking this, is we need to, beat the Chinese at their own game by providing real investment from private entities, but we need to take risks away from them. In the case of the Chinese, their COEs are government. They're owned by the government. So when they come out and do development, there are no risks
Right.
because once the Chinese government says we're going to invest it, they have unlimited capital to get this thing done. And they do spend, people think they're cheap, but they're not cheap on the COE side. But on the US side, there's so many risks for the big firms. And you're talking in many cases construction risks, capital risks in foreign countries. And they never took those risks away. So what you saw from the 60s, when I was in Afghanistan, I used to go down to Kandahar, and many of the roads there were built by U.S. firms, construction firms, who largely abandoned in the 70s because we didn't de-risk that. So they all exited that market. So you have now Chinese there, and you have Russians building a lot of things. That's what was happening in Africa. DFC is supposedly committing $50 billion for about 4 or 5 types of operations there, and it's the question of, do we want to invest in big infrastructure like the Chinese, or do we want to go back to, say, what Miss Powers did, which was micro lending? And you might have seen the Wall Street Journal article that was largely a failure on. Instead of OPIC projects like we used to see in Afghanistan, they broke all the money up and did micro lending to all these individuals with the hope that it would raise humanity. But we watch the Chinese, and they're building airfields, and they're building ports and roads. And of course, people are buying cars, and they're improving their way of life across Africa with new comm systems and new video. And the U.S. is not present because our whole investment strategy was not right. This is the first attempt that maybe things will change, but we're way behind again.
Yeah.
We're 5-10 years out of cycle here.
How much do you think this investment is tied to rare earth minerals and energy and things that are more in our national interest?
Yeah. When you look at their allocation of projects, where the money's going, it's airfields, it's ports, LNG terminals and energy related terminals, critical materials, like you said. You'll also see stuff like, logistics. How can you provide better throughput, whether it means it's not just the railroads, but it's also how it's all comes off and gets turned over and the time that it's committed in Africa. All of this is things that have interest in the U.S. from the U.S. perspective. And so there's a lot of, grousing when, we just had the ISOA East Africa conference, and we were a big sponsor of that. And you could see there's still lots of USAID type firms
Well, just shaking their
upset and
Yeah.
angry. When are you going to give us money to help women's issue or disabled issues in Africa? And, there's not many people that are getting what's happening. They're not buying into the real change because their cheese has been moved. But I think even if the Democrats take over again, they're going to have to address the fact that China is basically taking over all of Africa if we don't get involved. If America doesn't get involved with what the countries really need there from an economic basis.
Yeah. Well, it's different, right? The cheese has moved. The mission's different. There is money there. People are like, nothing's happened in Africa. There is. It's just different.
Yes.
Right? It's different, and I applaud you for sticking with it, and I think that market will come back. Whether Democrats come back in or not, I just think strategically it's really important to us to keep a foothold there.
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
You see a lot of mill-to-mill support for the countries, but it's smaller engagements.
Yeah.
And basically trying to help them on a military basis. But you don't see the Chinese doing that much. They're pretty much just selling stuff, mostly weapons or planes or things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to be effective in the future, just mill to mill.
I think I heard they said Africa problems need Africa solutions when it comes on the military side. So there's something to that. So then let's shift to your other time zone, Orlando, Western Hemisphere, domestic U.S., Homeland Security, Southcom, where we're also getting beat out by the Chinese.
Yes.
What do you see happening? Because it's not in the news so much because of the focus on the other hotspots. But what's going on in Western Hemisphere and Southcom?
From an infrastructure investment, I'm starting to see things. Obviously, the border wall. We worked for Trump 1 building it. We worked for the Bidens removing it, and now we're working for Trump 2 rebuilding it. So we're quite busy on the Mexican border doing most of it's electronic integration, not just the general inspection anymore, but how are electronics used in certain areas. But if you go further south, you do see lot of more projects coming out of USAID. So we're currently doing the planning and design for the consolidation of the Peruvian Navy, getting down to one location so that they can be more efficient. And so they're doing that. We've done weapon storage down in the south. And then, of course, there's a lot of other obvious operations. Puerto Rico, quite busy doing stuff there as well. Guantanamo Bay, we always have pop-ups. We're going in and out of there, of course. So it's the same places we've always worked, but they're just going to be, I think, a lot more money is going to be allocated than in the past.
We're going to talk about the future, but I'm going to ask you now, if you're kind of thinking strategically about Southcom, where do you see the center of gravity moving over the next few years? If you wanted to make an investment or you wanted to focus your business development resources, where would you post up in Southcom?
Well, the big question I have for you is Southcom and Northcom going to combine? And if they do, where will they be? Will they be in Miami or will they be in Colorado Springs? You have a guess?
Fort Bragg, and then the West, and that the West,
Fort Bragg.
that's
Yes,
isn't that the Western Hemisphere, the
that's
Hemisphere
true.
Command. So, but operationally, do you see a footprint in? I mean, there's one in Honduras. Where do you see to be like our in South America at least? Where do you see us
Yeah,
posting
it's a
up and putting in
it's a good point.
infrastructure?
I don't know. We just opened up in Venezuela and Caracas because the amount of investment that's going in there is very significant, and it's up our alley. It's more of it's less military, obviously, and more uh, civilian type dual use energy. But I see a lot of activity going in Honduras, things that we haven't done before. We're expanding. But Puerto Rico, I oftentimes think they're going to reopen Roosevelt Roads at some point. It's very busy down there, and it's still under BRAC. It hasn't. It's been turned over to the Puerto Rican uh, uh, Authority, but it hasn't. No reuse has really been identified.
That would make sense, right? It's kind of a
Yeah,
proven platform, and it's friendly turf, but that's a good idea. All
and the
right,
airfield's still there. Ports. Yeah.
so your three kind of talking through your three hubs or the time zones and what you're covering down on. Um, I know you've talked about this great realignment. What do you mean by that? What do you see happening right now uh, in terms of realigning, and how does it impact government contracting?
In our space, right? Infrastructure
Correct.
space,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, in your space.
Yeah. So I can remember back in the early '80s, we would have warrants and we would be awarding small contracts to augment government forces, whether it was civilians in the shops or Seabees in the
See,
field. But we self-performed everything. We had big engineering groups. Back then, they had a group called O9B, which did all the service specs and very smart people in the government. All that is gone. There's really
and
no
the
expert.
contractors were just on the fringe, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's when I started this. And the FAR, when they adopted the FAR in the early '80s, it was one shelf on the wall, three books. Okay, and they would mail us updates, and we would unscrew it and put them in. That's how we did it. Okay, and then the fax machine was invented. So then we started
Okay.
getting really a lot of
You're
updates.
sounding old now, but go ahead.
Yeah, and then emails, and then so now you can't even put the FAR in a room. You're incapable of even how do you comply with the FAR when everything's backwards and something's right, and you have clauses in your contract, and this section is over this section because you have to give priority. So it got to the point where who can comply and how difficult is this and how expensive and what's the drag on the taxpayers for all these things that were the Christmas tree ornaments, putting more ornaments, and some of the ridiculous things that are passed. And so it got to the point where we were waiting for the transformation that was going to happen, whether it was Mr. Trump or someone else. And they said, throw the FAR out. Let's find mechanisms to go around the FAR. And while we're doing that, let's consolidate all these smaller actions. So when we were doing very small, simplified acquisitions, less than $5,000 in the 80s, well, now, a SAP is, $500,000, $250,000, and they're now talking about consolidating all the contracts into GSA schedules. Even boss contracts, I had an interview with the GSA on how would they bring in all the contracts to have boss contracts through a GSA schedule, you know, and how would you take this away from the services? I mean, right now, does it really make sense that the Army, Navy, and Air Force all issue their own service contracts for their base support? You have a common framework of delivery in terms of how you palm it to Congress, but then the contracting is done separately. So all the inefficiencies. And one of the ways that the administration seems to be doing is they're letting go all the contracting officers. So they didn't let them rehire. So they're at NAVFAC, for example, they're about a third down. So they have fewer and fewer people. So they're being forced to come up with better ways to execute contracts. And what you see is GSA has some of those ways where you're scoring things independently. If you recall, when we were kids, we used to take exams and they were all on paper and we would answer them in longhand and the teacher would read it. And the engineering, we used to do the drawings. And well, now the professional engineering is multiple choice. They don't even actually design anything anymore because there's no way the professional licensing could certify it with the numbers of people. The same thing's happening, this consolidation. So I can fully see that authorities are going to continue to be consolidated at DoD, possibly even above DoD to GSA, and that you'll have opportunities to save money. And so the PCO function will be awarded, centralized, there'll be fewer disputes, there'll be more professional approaches, and then the execution, the ACO, will be delegated to the services or other agencies in government, but there'll be a one common delivery mechanism. So you see the consolidation going on. The Democrats didn't much like that in the past because it does cut out small businesses. You're basically delegating your small business goals now to a large business who typically has not been good about taking care of smalls. So how do they monitor that? There's been talk about more, pressure or negative outcomes for the larges if they don't take care of the smalls. But there's real concern. And will the next administration take us back to the smalls? But the idea that you have all these smalls and a percentage of smalls, and this week it's women-owned businesses, next week is disabled vets, next week. I mean, it was getting untenable on what it was. I know the LGBT was trying to get their set asides in the last administration. And so, if you're a large and you're trying to execute for the U.S. government, no wonder the taxpayers are paying 30 and 40% too much on execution. So how do you achieve what our nation's goal is on federal contracts and trying to help socioeconomic, but also get lower costs, quicker delivery? And so I see a lot of that. Now, the thing I've seen many times in the cycle is that we're moving so quick by executive order, we don't really have congressional support for a lot of the things that are happening, that once this is all over, there'll be repercussions. There'll be lots of questions. Why did you do this? People will be held accountable. Um, so that'll be the next stage of this evolution. But the pendulum won't go all the way over. It gets us closer to the right answer. It's kind of the American way, right? I mean, we always go back and forth, but we get closer to the right answer.
Do you see on the U.S. federal side, and not just DOW or DOD, but also Fed Civ and everything? What do you see happening over the next 24 months in the kind of infrastructure engineering space?
Yeah, so you can see the administration's priorities. They want to execute, the areas they want, and they had an experience in Trump 1 that reminds them of what they don't want to do. Trump 1, they followed the rules, they used the normal procurement strategies, and they didn't complete a lot of things. Great examples: the border wall, didn't complete it. Trump 2, they don't care about all those rules anymore. They're going to get their priorities done. So if that means OTAs, if that means reprogramming money out of execution to double the amount, even if it's more inefficient to execute, so that things get done that they want it. We see the ballroom and how fast the ballroom for the president's operating. They want execution. They don't want excuses anymore. And I don't really blame them. That's their mandate. So the next 24 months, it's very easy to read the playbook of the administration and understand where their investments are. But then the question is, when the administration changes, what will happen on the next round? Will all that work be suspended, and then we're re-doged, and we have another year of death, doge death like we had last year? Many smalls went out of business last year because the government just said, we are going in the wrong way. We're going to stop. We have the mandate of the people. That really impacted lots of layoffs. Um, you know, so will that happen on the next administration? I think it's likely, because we're going this way, and the next administration wants to go this way. There's no agreement on infrastructure investments.
So let's fast forward. It's 2029, heading into the summer of 2029. Talk about and whatever's going to happen over the next 30 months is going to happen, and we're in a new administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, and the Europeans are doing what they're doing, and what's happened in Africa has happened. Kind of, what's your high level overview of the engineering construction market from a government contracting perspective?
Yeah, the whole thing is lower cost and quicker. That is, and I don't think it's going to change that much with the next administration, even if they're influenced by lobbyists and all, because taxpayers want to get things done faster. They don't understand why the Chinese can build a highway, 1/10 the time. We're still trying to build our railroad in California. What are we, 10, 20 years later? And of course, the Chinese have built thousands of miles of railroad. And so Americans are wondering, why is this happening? Are they smarter than us? No, they just have less lawyers over there than we do. So I think what's going to happen is they're just going to speed up the acquisition process. So what you see in our area is, it used to be design, plan, design, and then build. That was the old days. Then it was design, build, and now it's progressive design, build. Progressive design, build is really how we used to do it 100 years ago, which is, hey, I have money, I'm an owner. Is there an architect that can help me? Come into my house. Let's start talking about, what do I really want? I mean, Carnegie did progressive designs in the 1900s, and we're cutting out all these government employees and government activities we got to get it right. The FAR says you got to get it right. So we're going to check the checker and double check the checker. Well, all that's going to go out. And now we're going to be with the contractor, and we have a programming amount target, and we have a general scope. And then as long as the design meets the intent of the Congress, then you're good to go. And so you present what your solution is, and then you're off and running. You're already in a design build mode. That won't change. I think that's how Exxon does business. Everyone does business except the government like that. The other thing I see is AI. AI is having a big impact because of the fact that you have staffing reductions on the government side. They're using AI to evaluate us. We're using AI to give them an answer that doesn't look like AI. So at some point, will there be no people? It'll just be AI. Could you just go to SAM and have the government say, this is my requirement, and based on what's in SAM, these are the 3 companies that we selected.
Wow.
And then we don't need any proposals. We don't need anything. We can get rid of everybody.
Hey,
So
I knew there'd be some edgy stuff here, Chris. What's your one word? What's one word you'd use to describe kind of your gut feeling about the future of government contracting in your space, in your sector? What's one word?
I think speed. We got to move faster. That's if you had to boil everything down, construction is just taking too long. So this idea of prefabrication, if you look at Indo-Pacom, they're moving more and more to expeditionary construction concepts. This idea of these big milcons that take 2-3 years, that's not going to get us there. There is some need for it, but could we give more expeditionary authorities, prefabricate things, equipment? Just to give you one idea, if you go back to home construction, say 30 years ago, most of the construction was done on the construction site, in the weather, in areas that may not have support. The workers had to go to the site. Over time, you're prefabricating more and more in shops and manufacturing areas, and then you're assembling it. So even for raw construction, they're all becoming prefabricated facilities, whether you realize it or not. On the military side, we are definitely going to prefabricated solutions and deployment solutions. So that's the only way to make the tip fit and make the timelines.
Yeah, speed is a common theme for sure. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about ISOA for just a minute. I know Mike Howard would probably like us to give a word. I mean, ISOA, you've been there longer than I have. I think you've been there like 13 years. I've been there, I don't know, 7, 8 years. And we've both been on the board. You had the experience of being the chairman of the board, which is like I said, a second job.
Yeah.
What role do you see ISOA playing over the next few years?
Well, to me, I think the challenge for ISOA is how do we become relevant for the administration? Because, we've been around 20 years, and we used to do large scale stability operations like Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, the administration now doesn't want to do those things. That's not of interest. It really stole a lot of the resources from America. 20 years in Afghanistan, and what did we achieve? Right. So we don't want, the association is not saying that that's what we want to do. We're basically saying we want to be there when the administration needs us. And even though we're called stability, we will do whatever is necessary for our country on any foreign wars. And I think they're realizing there is a need for us because there's places in deployment, whether it's Iran or whether it's the repair of these facilities in the Middle East, even humanitarian events. The association, thank God for ISOA, because you can bring firms that are willing to take the risk to solve some of our nation's biggest problems outside the U.S. So I think there'll be a bright future for it. And, thank heaven somebody thought of it, and put us together and got us all together.
Yeah. For anybody out there that doesn't know ISOA, I think the website stability-operations.org, great association, about 200 companies that do the hardest work in the hardest places all over the world. It's a fun group to be with, and really at the tip of the spear of U.S. and NATO international, the good guys foreign policy. So if you haven't checked out ISOA, go to an event, check out some of the content, some of the things we're doing there. It's a great association. And last plug, what are you doing there on your podcast, the Mission Ready podcast, Chris? What's your theme? What are you focused on?
Well, we kind of talked about it. I'm not a recruiting company, and so I didn't really have a strong focus on how it would benefit my firm. But the way I saw it was there was all these old timers that were post retirement, lots of experience in some of the countries that we were dealing with, and I was thinking maybe I should bring them back just to talk about their experience. I mean, you're talking about Nicaragua and the Philippines and all the uprisings, and some of our folks in Somalia and some of the Niger, living in Niger, and things that Americans don't realize, that we have folks in America that are experts. And I wanted to document this for posterity, not with any, but you got me thinking that I want to focus more on senior infrastructure people too now, and throw some of those in as well. But I see your podcast, and it's very interesting to see some of the CEOs and some of their comments on where the industry's going.
Yeah.
I mean, you've really done a great job, Jake. Your newsletter, people realize that you got to read Jake's newsletter, because you always have stuff in there that we didn't know about these contracts.
We're talking to everybody. You guys are talking to your slice. We're talking to everybody. And that's part of why we did the podcast. Like, let's get everybody together and talk about the future from different angles. So, well, good.
So I don't have to move to Switzerland?
You don't have
I thought
to move
I had
here. No, you can do it from anywhere in the world, Chris. You can do it from anywhere in the world. Well, everybody, if you haven't checked it out, go check out the Mission Ready podcast. Chris's team does it. They do it in person. They do a great job putting the production together, so check that out. Chris, thanks for being on the Future of GovCon.
Thank you, Jake.
I knew it would be a lot of fun. You have such a colorful career. We have so much in common. It's kind of scary,
Yes.
except for our haircuts. It's a little bit different, but otherwise we got a lot in common.
Yes.
And I'm an Army guy. But
thanks, Jake, for
yeah.
inviting me out here.
No,
it's nice to talk to you.
And I look forward to seeing you soon. It won't be too long, I'm sure. So, and for everybody out there, hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. You learned a little bit from Chris. Certainly, if you got some requirements, he's all over the world. He's obviously willing to take some risks. He's a creative guy, and Planate it's a top-notch organization that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Okay, Chris, last words. Good to go?
Jake, very good podcast. Thanks for including me. I never even thought of being on the show. Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, everybody out there, I believe it. It's true. And the future of GovCon is happening today. So stay tuned. Next week, we have another great show coming your way. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there. And you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.